Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second installment presentation of the semester. Um, Today, Matthew Hewitt is talking to us, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Linguistics at the University of Pennsylvania and a co-director of the Penn Syntax Lab. He holds a PhD in linguistics from the University of Chicago and previously worked as a postdoctoral fellow in linguistics at Georgetown University. His research reevaluates the nature of syntactic and morphological dependencies with many publications in different journals. Some of his research interests include resumptivity and A-bar dependencies and the A-bar distinction, lexical selection, passives, pronominal structure, and post-syntactic morphology, including especially morphological discontinuities and multiple exponents. He also specializes in Semitic languages, including especially spoken Arabic varieties. Please join me in welcoming our dear speaker, Matthew Hewitt.
Thanks so much, Salman. It's a very, very nice introduction. Despite you hearing about or hearing from the introduction that I do a lot of work on Semitic languages, you're unfortunately not going to be seeing anything about Semitic today. This is squarely focused on English at the start, and then we'll get to some other languages as we move on. So I think there's I don't know if Salman has shared the link in somewhere, either in the Zoom chat or something. I can also happily drop that in there too, Salman, if I'm able. Do you want me to?
I can do that. You continue.
Great. It's also available on my website if you go to presentations, and I'll just be sharing as well. So yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today about some ongoing work that I'm doing in collaboration with a former advisor of mine, Carlos Oreggi at the University of Chicago, on the interesting syntax of singular they. And so to sort of start us off, I think I'll start us with a puzzle that's somewhat self-evident as soon as you start thinking about singular they, but it's not actually self-evident how you account for this puzzle. So the puzzle is that singular they is semantically singular, right? In that it refers to a singular individual, like in the discourse in 1a, which I'll read in a second. They refers to the single individual Kelly, and yet it's morphosyntactically plural, as evidenced by the agreement that it triggers or controls on verbs. So for instance, in 1, A can say, hey, have you seen Kelly? Where Kelly uses they, them pronouns. B can say, no, they're late again, but not no, they is late again. So crucially, they, referring to a singular individual, nonetheless triggers plural agreement. So this tension between the referential and morphosyntactic features of they, this tension is acknowledged but not accounted for by extant analyses, say by Bjorkman, Conrod, or Konnelly and Cowper. These previous approaches take singular they to be a singular animate genderless pronoun, and they derive the apparent plurality of they via underspecification of the exponent that realizes that pronoun. But as we'll show, that analysis faces some difficulties in accounting for the agreement facts. So we're going to try to go a different route and relate the puzzle with singular they to similar puzzles with imposters, like we see in 2. These are nominal expressions that whose morphosyntactic person features differ from their referential person features, and a class of pronouns that we'll dub townhouse pronouns will actually ultimately assimilate singular they to a kind of townhouse pronoun. So in 2, we see the impostor yours truly, which is semantically first singular, right, refers to the speaker, but nonetheless controls third singular agreement. So yours truly is opposed to the underspecification analysis, not yours truly am, despite yours truly referring to the speaker. And in 3, we have editorial or royal we, again, semantically first singular, but morphosyntactically first plural, like we are opposed to the underspecification analysis, not we am opposed. Now, the main takeaways that we're going to argue for here is that the problem or puzzle, this tension between referential and morphosyntactic features actually has to do with pronouns like they or townhouses like we, and their structure, and not really with gender, as previous approaches have argued in the case of singular they. We're going to present a unified analysis of townhouse pronouns, things like editorial and royal we, and singular they, and ordinary pronouns, as all being D heads with elided complements, building on some prior work, say by Paul Elbourne, Paul Postal. But for singular they, we're going to propose the articulated structure and motivate it, here given in 4, where in the case of singular they, They is a third person plural pronoun, D head, heading a DP that we'll call the shell DP. And that third person plural pronoun has a null complement that is a third person singular non-binary pronoun that we'll dub PRON minus G for no gender or genderless. And crucially, that core DP is ineffable in the case of singular they and is covert in typical cases. So on our analysis, it will motivate each aspect of this analysis. And on our analysis, we're going to preserve the insight from previous work on singular they that English does have a singular non-masculine, non-feminine animate pronoun, but it's not going to be they. The genderless singular pronoun is this PRON minus G element. Furthermore, we're going to try to account for restrictions on possible combinations of core DPs and shell DPs we're going to look at possible combinations and argue that the possible combinations shed light on the inventory and representation of phi-features. And then finally, we're going to situate townhouses in the ecology of other pronouns and pronoun-like elements, looking at especially polite pronouns in many European languages. Okay, so we'll go to section 2. I don't know if it's typical to be interrupted in talks or if it's just at the end.
It's totally up to you.
Yeah.
Which option do you prefer? Do you want to be interrupted or?
I think it's fine to get interrupted. I may just say if I get interrupted and things are getting tight on time that I'll save it till the end, but feel free to jump in if you want to.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, so the first part that we want to motivate here in section 2 is that singular they isn't just a singular pronoun that looks plural, as previous analyses have taken it to be. It actually is morphosyntactically plural. So on these previous approaches I mentioned in the intro, singular they is taken to be a singular genderless pronoun, that lacks binary gender features, that just gets realized by the plural exponent they for lack of a better match. So we see this analysis schematized in 5, where the inventory of English pronouns is given here in the first row of 5. We have a masculine singular pronoun, feminine singular pronoun, this is for the third person, inanimate singular, non-binary singular, so singular lacking gender features, and then plural pronoun, which just lacks number and gender features, is using privative gender and number. On this approach, there's a distinct rule realizing the third masculine singular, third feminine singular, and third inanimate singular pronouns as he, she, and it, respectively. But then crucially, there's only one rule here for they that can match and realize the non-binary singular and plural pronouns. So it just realizes them as the elsewhere they. Now, without saying anything else, this analysis predicts that singular they, which realizes this non-binary singular phi-feature bundle, should trigger and control the same agreement as other singular pronouns, right? It's singular as a singular feature, but of course we already saw that that's not true, as shown in 6. Hey, have you seen Kelly? No, they're late again. Not they is late again. So we think this demonstrates that, look, singular they is morphosyntactically plural because it triggers plural agreement. You might be asking yourself, well, could we reanalyze singular agreement in English as gendered singular agreement because non-binary singular pronouns on this analysis lack binary gender features? But we also think that that won't work because antecedents of singular they share its gender features, whatever they are, right? Names like Kelly, for instance, lack binary gender features, yet those names nonetheless trigger singular agreement, right? The same agreement as he, she, and it. So we see this in 7. Kelly thinks they deserve first place, but not Kelly think or they deserves. Okay, so ultimately, we think that the plurality of singular they is about pronoun structure, not about exponents or about gender features, as these previous analyses have argued. So instead, we'd like to pursue a what we call a pseudopronominal analysis or a townhouse analysis of singular they. So this is repeated in 8, and I'll just re-emphasize the core parts here. So in this analysis of singular they in 8, we have a core DP, that's this part in gray, which is unpronounced, which is a singular non-binary pronoun, which matches the antecedent, like Kelly, in its features. It is the complement to a pronominal D head, in this case, a third person plural pronoun that's exponed as they, and that plural pronoun heads the larger DP, which we call the shell DP. We'll motivate each aspect of this analysis in this and following sections. So the first part that we can show is that in singular they, right, we're claiming there are essentially 2 pronouns stacked on top of each other, that the core DP, the inner part that's unpronounced, is a pronoun. We can show this because it triggers condition B and not C effects. So we see in 9, for instance, Kelly believes in them, a condition B violation because the core DP is locally bound by Kelly. Note that if we separate the two by a clause boundary, like in 10, like Kelly thinks they deserve first place, everything's fine, no condition C violation. So we think this is evidence for the pronominal status of the core DP, the pron minus G part, and not the shell because it's the core that bears the referential index, right? It's the core part that's interpreted as third person singular non-binary. We'll adduce evidence for the pronominality of the shell DP later. Okay, so we can extend this analysis to all other townhouses, including, for instance, editorial and royal we, which we already saw in the introduction. So we have an example of editorial we in 11a, like we are opposed to the underspecification analysis, where I'll get to you in a sec, Heidi, thanks, where we refer is used by a singular author, for instance. Furthermore, royal we in 11b, and we do assure you on a word of a prince, they shall be duly paid you, spoken by Queen Elizabeth I in reference to herself, a single author. Our analysis of of both of these cases, is that we have a first-person singular core DP that's unpronounced and is the complement to a first-person plural pronoun realized as we, which has the shell DP. Okay, Heidi, yeah, you had a question.
I just need to know why the townhouse terminology. I never heard of it. I know imposters. I don't know townhouses.
Yeah. So I'll show momentarily that townhouses have a different structure. What we're analyzing as a townhouse is a different structure than the analysis of imposters by Collins and Postal. Why the
I'm
name?
just really, why is it? Yeah, why the name?
Yeah, why the name? This is a question we get fairly often. So at least in my idiolect and several other idiolects of people that I know, townhouses are like apartments where you have like more than one floor stacked on top of one another. I think some people have row home for that, like thing that thing in the world, but for me it's a townhouse. So anyway, so the idea here is a pronoun over pronoun, like floor over floor. We're also, anyways, that's what it's supposed to mean. Okay, so nurse we, similarly, we want to assign a similar analysis. So nurse we is a use of we that refers to a group containing the addressee. Like when a nurse addresses one or more patients, they can say, how are we feeling today? Where, again, we refers to the addressee. So on our analysis, this would involve a second person singular or plural core DP, unpronounced, that is the complement to a first person plural pronominal D heading the shell. That's realized as we. Okay, so you can compare now, this is to kind of related to what Heidi was asking. We can compare this with Collins and Postal's analysis of imposters, like your humble servant finds the time before our next encounter very long in 13a, or 13b spoken by Nixon, you don't have Nixon to kick around anymore. In both of these cases, Collins and Postal argue that the overt shell, in this case, for instance, in 13b, Nixon, is underlyingly generated in a clause that's a positive to the core DP, which would be covert in this case, a first-person singular pronoun like me. And so the analysis would be as in 14, where Nixon, on their approach, moves to some position to get pronounced high. But basically, you have this underlying appositional structure between the core and the shell, me, Nixon, in apposition. Now, their evidence for this sort of structure for imposters is that essentially you can overtly realize the appositional structure, right? So I can say, I, your humble servant, find the time before our next encounter very long, or you don't have me, Nixon, to kick around anymore. Note crucially that that sort of overt appositional structure is just totally out for these townhouses that we've been investigating. So editorial we, you can't overtly realize both parts, the core and the shell, like in 16a. We oppose the underspecification analysis. I mean, I think this is only possible if you're correcting yourself, but it's not clearly an apposition. Likewise, in 16b, the queen can't say, I think, we do assure you on a word of a prince that they shall be duly paid you, again, except if it's a correction, it can't be apposition. And finally, in 16c, a nurse can't say to a patient, how are you, we, feeling today? Okay, so given that apposition is out with these townhouses, we think a different analysis is motivated, not one like the imposter analysis. So as I said before, our analysis actually likens townhouse pronouns to ordinary pronouns, where let's look at ordinary pronouns in 18. A prominent analysis of ordinary pronouns from Postal and Elbourne is that they are D heads with a covert NP complement. So for instance, she, in reference to the queen, would underlyingly have the structure she, D head, with an NP queen complement that's covert. On our analysis, right, townhouse pronouns are D heads, pronominal D heads, with covert DP complements. That's the crucial difference with respect to ordinary pronouns, the type or category of the complement. Our All right, so on our analysis, an important parallel between townhouses and ordinary pronouns is that both should have the external distribution of pronouns, right? They're both headed maximally by a pronominal D. And in fact, townhouses do behave like pronouns in their external distribution for things like particle shift. So we can see this in 19. Pronouns obligatorily undergo particle shift with particle verbs in English. They obligatorily appear to the left of particles. So we have things like do ghosts freak them out or do ghosts freak us out in 19A and B, but we don't have things like do ghosts freak out them or do ghosts freak out us without stress on the pronoun, that is. That's true regardless of whether them is singular them or plural them in 19A, or if us is, ordinary us or royal us or editorial us or nurse us, right? It doesn't matter if this is a townhouse or not, these still obligatorily undergo shift. Contrast this with the behavior of our expressions like Kelly, which can appear in either position relative to the particle. So do ghosts freak Kelly out or do ghosts freak out Kelly? So non-pronouns don't have to go undergo particle shift, nor do imposters. So do ghosts freak Milady out or do ghosts freak out Milady? Here again, non-pronouns don't have to undergo shift. So we take this as evidence for the pronominal status of the shell DP. It is important at this juncture to note that townhouses are not totally identical to ordinary pronouns. For instance, the complement of the pronominal D head, namely the core, has to be covert. We don't exactly have an explanation for this, but it does point to there still being a difference between townhouses and ordinary pronouns. For instance, although ordinary pronouns allow the ad nominal pronoun construction, like in 20, we Americans like our coffee sweet, don't we? I think is fine with the ordinary we reading. It's impossible to have an ad nominal pronoun construction with a townhouse we, like with nurse we. So while I think a nurse can say to a group of patients, we like our coffee sweet, don't we? I don't think it's possible to say we patients like our coffee sweet, don't we? Where that's a nurse addressing several patients. Okay. So ultimately, on our analysis, townhouse pronouns are like ordinary pronouns in that they're both headed by a D. They have the external distribution of a pronoun, but like imposters, the hidden content is a DP, potentially explaining this difference with respect to ad nominal pronoun constructions. Okay, so what have we claimed so far? Right, as a little recap. We've proposed that townhouses have this complex pronoun over pronoun structure where the core DP is a pronoun, evidenced by condition B. The shell DP, the upper part, is a pronoun, evidenced by obligatory particle shift. And furthermore, the relationship between these two pronouns is not one of apposition, unlike imposters. Instead, it's plausibly something like selection or complementation. So next, what we're going to argue in the following three sections is that the shell in singular they is indeed morphosyntactically plural, as we argued before. Furthermore, that the core DP in singular they is morphosyntactically singular. And then finally, that core DP, which we've identified with this label PRON minus G, doesn't show up because it's actually ineffable. Okay, great. So moving to section 4. So evidence for the shell DP being morphosyntactically plural, well, the evidence is primarily just typical run-of-the-mill verbal agreement, like we've seen a couple of times now, right? You get plural agreement with singular they, they're late again, not they's late again. So how do we explain this on our analysis? Well, by minimality, given the townhouse structure that we propose, which you can see here in 23, for they, a townhouse they as a subject, may be generated in spec little VP. So by minimality, only the phi-features of the shell, which are higher, either dominating the features of the core or C-commanding them. So only those features will be accessible to probing by a higher probe like T, as illustrated in 23. Okay, so that explains why we get plural agreement, not singular agreement with singular they. Likewise, with other townhouses like editorial we, right, where we get first plural agreement in 24, we're opposed to the underspecification analysis. The singular features of the core I are not accessible. Similarly, in 25, we're Queen Victoria, royal we, again, the first singular features are not accessible. Okay. We can also provide evidence that the core DP is morphosyntactically singular. Here, the argument is a little bit more involved, and it comes from clefts, looking at clefts. So clefted subjects in their objective form, so when they're pronouns, when you take a pronoun, pronominal subject, put it in its objective form, and then cleft it, uniformly triggers third person agreement inside the cleft, but then with matching number. So in 26, we see that if you cleft the objective pronominal subject me, like it's just me who's responsible, you get third-person agreements inside the cleft, but it's still singular. It matches in number, right? You don't get something like person and number matching, like who am responsible, or a different number, for instance, who are responsible. You only get third singular in this case. Crucially, we can show that, like what's interesting for us is that clefted singular them also controls singular agreement inside the cleft. And this is in contrast to the behavior of plural them. So if we have in 27a singular them, it's just them who doesn't need to be looked at, referring to a single individual. I think this is fine, but and much better than it's just them who don't need to be looked at, which I and the speakers I've talked to have a strong, intuition is actually the plural them, as shown in 27b. So it's just them who don't need to be looked at, is strongly associated with a plural them reading. We think the same holds for other townhouse pronouns. So if we look at different versions of us, like editorial us versus ordinary us, we get a similar contrast. It's just us who's opposed to the underspecification analysis is editorial we, or editorial us, versus it's just us who are opposed to the underspecification analysis, that's ordinary we, or ordinary us. Likewise with nurse versus ordinary us. So is it just us who doesn't need to be looked at? Versus is it just us who don't need to be looked at? Again, the latter with don't plural agreement is much preferred on the plural ordinary we reading. Okay, so we think that this evidence that we've adduced from the clefted agreement fact is evidence that the core DP is morphosyntactically singular and not just notionally singular, because if we compare the behavior of these clefted pronominal subjects with clefted pluralia tantum nouns that are notionally singular but morphosyntactically plural, like scissors, we see that those nouns obligatorily trigger plural agreement in this context, like in 30. So it's just the scissors which don't need to be looked at. Scissors is a pluralia tantum noun, notionally singular but morphosyntactically plural, and it nevertheless triggers plural agreement inside the cleft. So it won't do to just say, well, singular them and editorial us and nurse us, trigger singular agreement in the cleft because they refer to a singular individual. Like simple reference or notional features are not enough. There have to be morphosyntactically represented features with these townhouses, morphosyntactically represented singular features to get these to work out. Okay. Right, so I'm not going to give you an analysis right now of the clefted agreement facts. See Appendix A for that. And then we also have some facts from agreement with disjunctions that provides more evidence that singular they does contain singular features. That's in Appendix B. I see that there are some questions in the chat. Let me pause to see, are these things that I should...
Hey, no, don't worry about them. I'll ask you at the end. I'm just making notes to myself about things I want to ask you about.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so given what we've said so far, this leads us to something of a puzzle, right? I've tried to motivate this analysis where singular they, right, is a townhouse. It's a two-pronoun structure where you have a shell pronoun, a core pronoun, and the shell is plural, and the core is this singular genderless pronoun pron minus g. But you might be asking yourself, well, hey, why the heck don't we ever see that thing, pron minus g, showing up on the surface? So why instead, when you want to get a singular genderless pronoun, do you just get singular they instead? So why do we have 31? Kelly thinks they deserve first place, and not something like, Kelly thinks pron minus g deserves first place. And so our proposal here is that pron minus g is an ineffable pronoun, which is going to restrict it to occurring in covert contexts like the null complement of a townhouse structure, right? We said pronouns have covert complements, and so in this case, a pronoun that's ineffable will be able to appear syntactically, given that it's not going to get pronounced. Okay, so we're following a line of literature here that argues that ineffability results when there is no matching exponent to realize the relevant structure. So on our approach, the rule inserting they has to be specified for plural number. It's not an elsewhere contra this previous work on singular they. So we can see our analysis for singular they and really the English pronominal system here in 33. Third-person pronominal system. So given the 4 singular feature bundles here, there's a third masculine singular feature bundle, third feminine singular feature bundle, an animate singular feature bundle, and a non-binary singular feature bundle, that's pron minus g. And then we also have this plural feature bundle here, third plural feature bundle. We propose that there's a distinct rule realizing each of the masculine, feminine, and inanimate singular feature bundles, respectively, as he, she, and it. Furthermore, there's a rule realizing the third-person plural feature bundle as they, but there is no rule realizing a third-person non-binary feature bundle, that is pron minus g. So what's that going to mean? Well, if we generate a structure like in 34, Kelly thinks then third person non-binary pronoun deserves first place. There's just going to be no way to realize, no rule to realize that structure. And given that there is no match, we're going to run into an ineffability problem and therefore a crash. What's going to happen in singular they is that pronominal D, the shell pronominal D, will trigger ellipsis of its complement, eliding it, making it covert. That will preempt vocabulary insertion and thus circumvent the problem with ineffability. So we see this in 35, right? Kelly thinks they deserve first place, where pron minus G is now embedded inside a townhouse structure, the complement of third person plural D, realized as they. Furthermore, that D head triggers ellipsis of the core DP of pron minus G, and we have no problem at vocabulary insertion. Okay, so we think that the ineffability of pron minus G reveals the need for a marked plural representation of singular they, right? Of the exponent they, a marked plural representation of the exponent. I think I have just enough time to give you a taste of the evidence we think that there is some empirical evidence that pron minus G is indeed ineffable, and that comes from looking at left edge deletion. So I'm going to try to go through this at a quick clip. So our analysis so far that pron minus G exists is just ineffable predicts that it should also appear in salvation by deletion contexts, other contexts where it's just null, right? Because if it's null, there's going to be no problem at vocabulary insertion. And indeed, we think that that's borne out in left edge deletion sentences. So let's do some background on left edge deletion. In this construction, you delete material starting at the left edge of the sentence, as the name indicates, and only prosodically weak or unstressed elements like pronouns and auxiliaries can delete. So we can see this in 36. So given a sentence like, have you invited Kelly to the party yet? In left edge deletion, you can delete sort of successively from the left edge, like you can delete have, giving us, you invited Kelly to the party yet? You can delete have you, like invited Kelly to the party yet? That's in 36C. But you crucially can't delete non-weak elements like the main verb, the participle invited. So you can't get something like Kelly to the party yet in 36D, right? Only prosodically weak elements can delete. Furthermore, as the name indicates, deletion has to take place from the left edge. So though pronouns can delete if everything to their left has also deleted, you can't just delete a non-leftmost pronoun like in 37. Have invited Kelly to the party yet is totally out. Now, what we find striking and supporting our analysis of singular they and pron minus G is that pron minus G can also occur in left edge deletion sentences. And we can see this by looking at the example in 38. So speaker can say, has Kelly said if they're coming to the party yet? And I think it's possible to respond, nope, hasn't responded yet. Now, crucially, the missing subject that's been deleted in this sentence in the A response in 38 can't be they, because we see that the surviving ox bears singular agreement. And we can contrast this discourse in 38 with a similar discourse in 39, where you can actually have plural agreement on the ox that survives deletion, indicating that they must have been deleted in 39. So nope, haven't responded yet. That has to involve deletion of they. So we have to have deleted something else in 38. We contend that that's pron minus G. The missing subject in 38 crucially can't be he, she, or it, because 38 doesn't involve misgendering of Kelly, if Kelly uses they, them pronouns. And furthermore, the missing subject we think can't be Kelly because, as we showed before, only prosodically weak elements like pronouns and auxiliaries can undergo this deletion. Okay, so what's the upshot here? Well, we've argued that pron minus G is an ineffable, non-binary third-person singular pronoun, and its ineffability restricts it to these covert contexts, like the complement of a townhouse or left-edge deletion sentences. It may be that in some varieties or some idiolects, there are innovative pronouns that actually can realize this structure, this feature bundle. So see Bjorkman for some proposed lexemes there. Okay, so let's do a little interim summary here and go over our remaining desideratum. So we've proposed that singular they is a townhouse with a covert pronominal core DP and this plural shell. And crucially, the core is a singular animate genderless pronoun, pron minus G, which is ineffable. So you might be wondering at this point, this is sort of, I think, a major question. Why is it that you get they over pron minus G and not, I don't know, any other pronoun on top, realizing the shell's features? Like, why do we have a third person plural pronoun there as opposed to something else? So this is now coming to section 7. So the question here is, what determines possible combinations of core and shell DPs, right? Because if we didn't impose any restrictions, we might predict just sort of like any pronoun could substitute for any other pronoun, speaking somewhat informally. So we think that the restrictions here fall out from a feature-based condition, but there are other analyses which are possible, which you can feel free to ask me about in the question period. So our condition we propose is in 40. We call this the feature containment condition on townhouse pronouns. And this is stated as, in a townhouse pronoun structure, the phi-features of the core DP must be a subset of the phi-features of the shell DP. And we'll try to motivate this and show how this condition helps us understand possible and impossible townhouse pronouns. So let's first look at some number asymmetries of townhouse pronouns. So first of all, a plural shell can have a singular core, but you can't have a singular shell with a plural core. So we've been seeing this throughout, right? You have singular they, which has a plural shell, singular core. Kelly thinks they deserve first place, plural they, singular pron minus G. That's fine. You can't do the reverse. So you can't have something like 42b, the girls think she deserves first place, where she refers to the girls. So she for they, or she over they, singular over plural, not possible. Likewise, royal we is possible. We are Queen Victoria, we over I, plural over singular, but not I for we. So there is no I am Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, where I is a shell over a plural, first person plural core. So the number takeaways we think are that in line with our feature containment condition, plural must therefore be marked and singular must be a subset of plural. So we use a privative representation, privative plural. Given this, right, something like royal we in 45 would have the analysis, right? A first person plural pronoun would have a plural shell and a singular core satisfying feature containment. Whereas in 46, I am Queen Victoria and Prince Albert with a singular shell and a plural core would not satisfy feature containment, rightly ruling out singular shells, plural cores. Okay, what about gender asymmetries? The main generalization here is stated in 47. A third person singular shell can't have a third person singular core of any other gender. So we can see this in 48, right? Kelly thinks it deserves first place, for instance, is totally impossible with a third person singular inanimate shell and a third person singular non-binary core, totally impossible. In general, any combination of singulars is not going to work, of a singular shell and a singular core, right? You can't use one pronoun to sort of substitute for another, one singular pronoun to substitute for another singular pronoun. So we, in line with our feature containment condition, therefore conclude that all four genders are marked and that there are no subsets among them. This leads us to the representation in 49, where we have privative, masculine, feminine, inanimate, and non-binary. So all four gender features are marked here. So how do we explain the facts now? Well, for something like Kelly thinks it deserves first place with a singular inanimate shell and a non-binary core, right? That representation is not going to satisfy feature containment. This is going to be rightly ruled out. But crucially note that what this means for our analysis, given that PRON minus G we've proposed has this non-binary gender feature, it must mean that third person plural pronouns have gender features to comply with our feature containment condition, at least in the syntax. This is shown in 51. Kelly thinks they deserve first place. Both the core and the shell have to have non-binary features to satisfy our condition. A genderless shell would not satisfy the containment condition. Okay, what about turning now to person, right? The final of our three phi-features to consider for feature containment. Things are a little bit more complicated here, so we're going to sort of go through step by step. So to a first approximation, a first person shell, right, can have a second person core. We saw this with nurse we. But you can't have the reverse. You can't have a second person shell with a first person core. So 52A, we need to be patient. Nurse talking to a patient. We for you, we use to refer to the addressee. In our analysis, this is a first person plural shell, second person core. That's fine, first over second. The reverse is not. So you need to be patient. We don't think is a possible way to say I need to be patient or we need to be patient. Okay, so this seems to work so far, but we actually think that the generalization is more interesting than this, namely that nurse we, and I think a lot of people have this intuition, is inclusive, right? It's inclusive of the addressee, not exclusive. And we can actually show this when we turn to look at languages, unlike English, which morphosyntactically register the inclusivity distinction. But crucially on our analysis, what we're going to say is that English does have a inclusivity distinction featurely, even if that distinction is neutralized by exponents. Okay, so let's see the supporting evidence here coming from Taiwanese phone we. This was the name given to it by Collins and Postal. So this is a use of we very similar to nurse we, where when you pick up a phone, the person answering can ask essentially, who are you? Who is the caller? Ask for the identity of the caller. And in that case, it's possible to say, who are you? Second singular. This is shown in 53. Who are you? The answerer can also say, who are we inclusive? Which again is in reference to the addressee. So that's like nurse we, but we call it phone we. But you can't use first plural exclusive here. So who are we exclusive is out. Okay, so if Taiwanese phone we should be assigned a similar analysis to nurse we think what this demonstrates is that only first inclusive townhouses can refer to the addressee, not first exclusive not first exclusive townhouses. Therefore, we revise our asymmetries for the English data here in 54 and 55. A first inclusive shell can have a second person core. So we need to be patient is first inclusive over second person you. First exclusive shell cannot have a second core. So we first exclusive with second core is bad. And then furthermore, a second person shell can just never have any first person core. That's in 55. Turning to other person asymmetries, namely looking at combinations of participants and non-participants, it just turns out you can't ever combine them as far as we can tell. So it's not possible to say something like, I deserve it to mean he deserves it, or she deserves it, or it deserves it. Furthermore, I don't think it's possible to say he deserves it to mean something like I deserve it or we deserve it, just out of the blue. So given this incompatibility of participant and non-participant shell and core DPs, that suggests something about person, which I'll get to in a moment. Furthermore, although this is just a conjecture, we think that a first inclusive shell can plausibly have a first exclusive core. This is probably what's going on in royal we. So we are Queen Victoria, but we suspect that a first exclusive shell can't have a first inclusive core, though it remains to be seen in languages that have inclusivity distinction if something like 57b can actually be empirically demonstrated. Okay, so what are the asymmetries that we've just deduced from person? Well, you can't combine participant and third person, participant and non-participant, so no combination there is possible, as shown in 58a. Furthermore, you can't combine first exclusive with second person in any way. And then finally, you can combine first inclusive with either first exclusive or second, but only when first inclusive is the shell. So first inclusive over first or second is fine, but not the reverse. So what would this mean for the representation of person given our feature containment condition? Summarizing everything, this would mean that third person, participant, speaker, and addressee all need to be marked. And furthermore, second and first exclusive have to be subsets of the representation of first inclusive. And so this leads to the feature geometry in 59a, where given this sort of person-dependent node, we have participant and non-participant being separate dependents of the pi node. Right, neither contains the other. And furthermore, we have a marked representation of speaker and addressee, each dependence of the plus participant node. And then the representations of each person are given here in 59b through e. So how now do we account for some of the data that we saw before? For something like nurse we, like we need to be patient, right? The shell would have the representation first inclusive plural, where the core DP would just be a second person pronoun. That representation satisfies feature containment. The features of the core are a proper subset of the feature, or are a subset of the features of the shell. But the reverse is impossible, as shown in 61, because this will violate feature containment. So you need to be patient to mean we need to be patient. The core features don't form a subset of the shell features. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm not going to walk through the feature bundles here, but what we think is that the feature containment condition in combination with this proposal in 62 for the underlying feature bundles of English pronouns correctly restricts the set of possible and impossible townhouses. Now, there are a couple salient things I want to point out from our proposed feature system. The first is that third person is morphologically specified, not radically underspecified, right, in order to account for the incompatibility of participant and non-participant in townhouses. Furthermore, number has to be privative while person has to, in part, be binary, again, to account for the asymmetries that we documented. Okay, in the remainder of time, like a few minutes, I'm going to try to just briefly go over a couple interesting case studies of other pronominal-like beasts, just to illustrate how our reasoning sort of might be extended out, expanding the empirical scope out into other pronouns and other languages. So just to summarize sort of what we think are the definitional properties of a townhouse, given this case study from English, we think, first of all, to have a townhouse, you need to have a bipartite nominal structure with both a shell and a core. Okay, that's crucial on our analysis. So we detected this with things like agreement and clefs, among others. Furthermore, definitionally, to be a townhouse, the relationship between the shell and the core has to be complementation, not apposition, so unlike imposters. Furthermore, to be a townhouse, you have to have a pronominal shell, right? And we evidence this, or we provided evidence for this from particle shift. And then finally, the core needs to be a pronoun, and we provided evidence for that from condition B. What we want to show here briefly is that if you look at other pronoun-like beasts that you might suspect could be assimilated to the townhouse analysis, probably aren't townhouses. At least you in English and Spanish usted are probably not townhouses. The jury is sort of out on these other elements from French, Italian, and German. So I'll briefly go through English, English you. So English singular you has singular reference but triggers plural agreement, like how are you doing today can be singular or plural you. So that might suggest a bipartite structure like in 64, where we have plural you over singular you. But we actually think that that's wrong. Instead, what we want to propose is that the apparent plurality of singular you is indeed a matter of exponents, like Bjorkman and others proposed for singular they originally, not pronominal structure, so delete number in a second person morpheme, for instance. Post-syntactically. And the evidence for this comes from an observation from Collins and Postal that only plural you can bind a selves reflexive. So looking at 66, we see their condition on selves reflexives, which says that in a reflexive pronominal of the form P selves, P must be morphosyntactically plural. What's interesting here is that if we look at singular they and plural they, this provides evidence for plural features of the shell in both cases. So for plural they, you can have, are they taking good care of themselves today? Plural them, that's fine. Are they taking good care of themselves today is for many speakers fine for singular them, though there is a dialectal variation here. Crucially, yourselves is only possible with a plural you. It's not possible with a singular you. Right, so are you taking good care of yourselves today? 68A, that's fine, plural you, but not are you taking good care of yourselves today, meaning singular you, right? So if you also had a townhouse structure like them, we would expect yourselves to be fine parallel to themselves when in reference to a single individual, but that's not true. Right? So we think that this is evidence that singular you is really morphosyntactically singular, despite the fact that it controls plural agreement. It just winds up looking plural during exponents. Okay, the final case study, I know we're coming up on time, that I want to go through briefly is polite usted in Spanish. And basically what we're going to say is that Spanish usted is not a townhouse because the shell isn't a pronoun, right? It actually distributes like a non-pronoun. So the core, sort of the reason you might think usted is a townhouse is because it has second person reference, but third person agreement, right? Suggesting again a bipartite structure. We can see in 69A, usted is an asshole. It is in reference to the addressee, right? But nonetheless controls third person singular agreement on the verb. Likewise, in 69B, usted plural are assholes. Again, is in reference to the addressee, but triggers third person agreement on the verb. So this could suggest a townhouse structure, but instead we think that the analysis in Collins and Ordóñez, represented here in 70 A and B, is more on the right track, where there is a covert second person pronoun in both usted and ustedes. Right, that's covert second singular pronoun, 70A, covert second plural pronoun, 70B. But crucially, following Collins and Ordóñez, we think there's evidence that the shell is not a pronoun. It's actually a lexical n-head, as illustrated here in our analysis, that has third-person features. And the evidence for that, let's actually skip this core is a pronoun part in 71 and go right to 72. The evidence that the shell is not a pronoun comes from possessive doubling. So we see in 72A and B that pronouns in Spanish don't allow possessive doubling. You can only have the prenominal possessive pronoun, like in 72A, your book, not your book of you, or her book, 72B, not her book of her. This is crucially in contrast to the behavior of imposters, right? Non-pronominal imposters, like Milady's book, which do allow possessive doubling. And importantly for us, Ustev also allows a pronominal doubling. So her book of Ustev can mean your book, right? That's fine. Again, that suggests that Ustev is not a pronoun, right? But actually has the external distribution of a non-pronoun like an imposter. So what we think this means is that polite Usted is indeed bipartite, but it's just not a townhouse, right? So it doesn't satisfy all the criteria that we established above for being a townhouse. There are some tentative arguments considering, sorry, we have some responses to previous work that has argued that Ustev is a pronoun. One of them comes from PCCFX. I encourage you to ask me about that in the question period. And then we have this sort of equivocation about what's going on in French vous, Italian lei, and German sie, but for time's sake, I'll just leave a consideration of that for the question period. So let's briefly conclude. We've tried to argue here that singular they is this townhouse pronoun, essentially a two-part pronoun structure like editorial, royal we, and nurse we. These have pronominal D heads with null pronominal DP complements. Restrictions, we think, on the possible townhouses tell us something about the inventory and representation of phi-features. And crucially, this was sort of the conclusion, the last section. We think that not everything that looks pronominal and shows this mismatch is necessarily a townhouse. It requires case-by-case evaluation. So thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. So questions, comments, the floor is open. If you have a question, raise your hands.
Yeah, Heidi.
Thanks, Matthew, for this great talk. Really cool. Let's see, I just want to scroll back and see which ones I want to prioritize for helpfulness. I caution about the argument from pluralia tantum in English, just because the typical pluralia tantum noun cross-linguistically can combine with one directly. So you can say something like one, sled or whatever. Sled is pluralia tantum in Russian. One sleds. And English PT nouns don't let you do that. You have to have the one pair of scissors construction with the kind of classifier, which maybe suggests that they're more robustly plural than you think they are. Whereas
I see.
a real pluralia tantum noun cross-linguistically composes with one. You can refer back to it with a singular pronoun, all kinds of evidence that they're silently singular.
I see. That's right. So, sorry, are you saying that for English pluralia tantum, I mean, right? Could we conclude from the fact that it can't combine with one, and furthermore that pronouns that refer back to scissors, for instance, have to be plural, right? Them.
Exactly.
The scissors, I put them on the table. Yeah, that's evidence that it is plural, really, pluralia tantum.
Exactly.
Yeah, for us, that's crucial, right? So the contrast with, let me scroll back up. The contrast we made with pluralia tantum in the clefting facts was in particular to say that scissors is morphosyntactically plural in English, even though it's maybe notionally singular. Are you?
Yeah, but I think it's not right. But it's crucial that it's not. So what I think the evidence from English shows us is that actually they're not even notionally singular. There's no hope for scissors. So if you could really show that morphosyntactic plurality of, say, Russian sledges was controlling agreement, even in combination with a word like one, then you'd really have a strong case.
I see what you're saying. So
Yeah.
the fact that scissors never shows, yeah, we would want to find cases where its notional singularity shows up in English, and if we could do, then the argument would be more secure. Yeah,
exactly. That was the point. I will. I guess I will see. There's lots of people who want to ask a question. So I will shut up and we can get back to me later.
Thank you, Heidi. It's D.
Hey, yeah, thank you so much. It was a very interesting talk. As one of the people who uses the pronouns in question,
yeah.
And I think that a couple people who've heard me talk about this know where we're going with this. Particularly my friends from the UK will use my name, will use D with plural agreement. So like RD coming tonight. Like
Cool.
as if my name inherently has like a plural feature on it.
Cool.
This is something that I've experienced in that context. I also had a colleague who was in a meeting with another non-binary person who saw someone here in the US in Arizona use it for somebody named Jeremy. And it was like, Jeremy are going to be on the committee.
I see.
And so I was just going to say that does seem to be happening in some communities and in some spaces. Again, for me, I'm mostly seeing it with my British friends, but I have an example from here, so.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Do you know if for the British friends, this is only for non-binary names, or likewise for the attestation you have in the US? Because I'm fairly certain there are varieties of, is it Scots English or something that just level the paradigm anyway to the plural, at least in some context. So that's essentially what I'm wondering. Do you know if these British friends are only doing this, say, with your name, but not?
Only for me, yeah. I see them using singular agreement with other people's names who ascribe to gender or whatever the not as cool kids are up to. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Okay, we were not aware of this, and so I haven't given thought to it yet. Let me just write a note of this.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. It was really weird for me the first time that I was like that I saw it occur in regards to me, and then someone else was like, I had the weirdest thing happen in this meeting that I was in with Jeremy the other day, who used to be like an important led our graduate student professional council. So
Right.
it's like a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so those are really interesting. I mean, they wouldn't obviously immediately fall out on our analysis. Like our analysis, as it stands, doesn't immediately extend to them because our analysis crucially is saying there's something
Thing
special about
that's not
pronouns.
allowed. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it may beg the question, well, okay, are there contexts in which I guess there are a couple things we would want to establish, like, is this plural agreement or is this sort of like a plural looking agreement? That is to say, is there a plural feature there or some neutralized agreement on the verb? But it would have to crucially be in a context not just restricted to pronouns, but all, say, non-binary looking things for these speakers. So both names in reference to a non-binary individual and also pronouns in reference to a non-binary individual. So we'll have to think about it more. Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing this to our attention.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dee. Sam?
Hi, thank you for this talk. It was really interesting. I was just wondering if you guys have anything to say about indefinite singular they. Is that treated the same way as non-binary they, or not?
Yeah, but by indefinite you mean something like the use of singular they when the antecedent is something quantified or non-specific, or there are various types of antecedents. This is something that Kirby Conrod and Byron On have looked at quite a bit in recent kind of large-scale survey work. We have thought about this, so we would like to say that our analysis also extends to those uses of singular they. In particular, I mean, this is made a little bit complex because the use of non-binary they, the use of singular they with gendered antecedents varies across dialect groups or idiolects, things like this. This was documented by Konnelly and Cowper. And then there's the added matter of speakers that allow antecedents of singular they, which are, say, quantificational or non-specific or indefinite. So I think getting an analysis that works for that whole big picture is certainly a desideratum. So I'm not totally sure how much what I'm about to say is going to treat all of that. But basically, we think that by varying the semantics of what this non-binary feature is, you might be able to get at some of that variation. Namely, if non-binary, what we've been labeling non-binary, doesn't literally mean uses non-binary, identifies as non-binary or something like that, but just says, there is no binary gender associated with the referent in the common ground or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one could get at the uses of like non-specific they when you're deflecting from the gender of of the reference of the person you're talking about. So in a case like my teacher said they're going to post the homework later, or the person knocking at the door seems like they want to come in those contexts where you're just deflecting the gender doesn't matter. It could be that, again, we can use the same analysis, the same representation, but it's just non-binary. That feature has a different meaning, something like
not binary.
More general. Yeah, exactly. There's no binary gender associated with them in the common ground. Right. That would be what I would say to sort of just extend out from narrowly non-binary to, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Massimo.
Well, let's have a little look at Italian and French because it's interesting. So in Italian, lei, you have two, more familiar. Two,
yes.
And you have lei, which is, third person.
Yeah.
In French, you have vous, the plural vous, but then the verb agrees with the singular.
That's right.
Really, really interesting, complicated. I understand from Asma that in Urdu there is something similar. So you have respect, not familiarity, and two. Loro is the plural, loro. Essi, loro. It's more formal, it's more literary. Essi. Loro dicono, they say that, loro dicono che. So you have all these interesting complications.
Yes. Yeah, so I'll say something briefly. Thank you for bringing this up about the Italian and the French cases. Let me take the French case first. The French case is something that we want to exist, basically, Carlos and I, because you may have noticed that there's this bizarre idiosyncratic gap in English. Like, why is there no townhouse you? Namely, why is there no plural you over singular you? All of our analysis leads one to expect that that should exist. We think that there are ways to restrict the system to sort of account for that as like an idiosyncratic gap, like a lexical gap. But something that would support that being an idiosyncratic gap in English is if French polite vous really were a townhouse, because as you point out, vous can be used in polite address to refer to a singular addressee. That would be a second person plural pronoun, shell with a second person singular core, filling the gap that we have from English. So that looks like a great candidate in our view for a townhouse. Italian lei, though, doesn't look like it would be a good candidate. In particular because it triggers third person feminine singular agreement sort of regardless of the properties of the antecedent. So we have a problem both for gender on our analysis and person, because it would be third over second, which does not comply with our feature containment condition. So we haven't really done the legwork yet on these forms.
You see, lei, you would say to a man, lei è venuto. You wouldn't say lei è venuta if it's a man.
I see.
It's interesting because lei is polite, but then you have, in the verb, you have agreement, with the masculine. If you're addressing a man, lei è venuto. You don't say lei è venuta.
I see. I see. The facts that we're reporting here, facts from Margaret Wong, an LLT paper. She reports, I think that you get feminine even when feminine on the verb, the predicate adjective here, sick, even when the referent is masculine. But I think basically what this is all pointing to is that we just need to do more work on these things to sort of understand, are they townhouses? If so, that is a problem for our analysis. Are they not townhouses? Okay, then there's some other way to generate a structure that leads to this mismatch, this referential and morphosyntactic mismatch. We think that's already represented by Spanish usted. So yeah, I think ultimately we would want lei to be more like usted than like singular they or editorial we, etc. That's sort of where we stand.
I'll be happy to help with Italian.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Massimo. The last question goes to Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, I just have a quick question about the representation of gender features.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding correctly, gender features are sort of privative on their own. How does how would that then work when we look at markedness and syncretism and impoverishment? So how can we capture the fact that feminine tends to be a more marked gender if they're sort of independent privative features?
Yeah, Yep, it's a great question. Well, the first thing I would say is, would Carlos agree with me saying this? Let's say Matt says this, and I'll leave Carlos to sort of think about things on his own, speak for himself. I mean, my intuition would be, okay, the evidence for feminine being marked that you're referring to may come from like languages with different inventories of gender features. And so there's a broader question, is the representation that we've posited in 49 a universal? I don't know. I mean, we're arguing for this representation based on English internal data. I mean, it remains to be seen if that's the right analysis for other languages as well. So I think maybe the right way to think about answering your question is, let's start looking at townhouses in languages that have maybe, where we probably want to say, feminine is marked for various other reasons. Is that also, does that have consequences in the right direction, given our analysis, for the inventory of townhouses in that language? I mean, that would be sort of empirically the direction I would want to push in. But I mean, at present, I think I would just want to say, this is the representation we're proposing for English, given the townhouse facts. I'm not sure yet how that extends to other languages. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Since we are at time, so I thank you again, Matthew. Great presentation, and thank you all. Hope to see you all next time.